It's my pleasure to give you kind of an overview of what we did on discourse structure for the past 20, as you mentioned, 20 and a few years already. The title is too long, I won't read it again. I'll send you straight to the overview. So my first part will be to introduce rhetorical structure theory, because this will be the running theme for the whole talk. Then a brief overview of the Potsdam Commentary Corpus, which we started building 20 years ago. I will show you how we move the corpus to a linguistic database that allows for multi-level querying and visualization. And then I guess the most part will be spent on human annotation, problems with this theory, how to handle disagreement, how to be not frightened by disagreement, but how to embrace it actually. And then in the end, some remarks on automatic eRST parsing with a baseline system that we put together just last year. Yeah, eRST was proposed by Bill Mann and Sandra Thompson in the 1980s. Bill Mann worked on natural language generation. He was an NLP person at ISI in California. Sandra Thompson is a functional linguist, and they joined forces and brought up this approach to text structure quite some time ago, which has a number of principles I enumerated here. The idea of providing an analysis of a text preview, this kind of thing, is to first chop the text into elementary discourse units, into pieces, which is sometimes sentences, sometimes units smaller than sentences, and in some cases larger than sentences. But we will get into this in a little more detail later. Next step is whenever there are adjacent units, these elementary units, you can fuse them into a larger unit by assigning a discourse relation or coherence relation to the two things. And this is a recursive process. So this goes between neighboring elementary units and then recursively upward until you have a complete tree structure that spans the whole text. One idea is that these relations are kind of not symmetrical. Most of them are. They say one of my arguments is more weighty than the other. This is called the nuclearity aspect. So these relations have one nucleus and one satellite. We will see examples, of course. And the relation set is divided into families that I will also show in a second. So just to illustrate, here we have elementary discourse units that are sentences in the first two cases, then actually a phrase, and then the rest of the sentence in the condition relation, and so on and so forth. And we have relations on the level of just elementary discourse units that are fused and then recursively upwards. It doesn't maybe look like a tree at very first glance, but in the end, it's a well-formed projective tree with no crossing edges or any other complications. That's the idea of eRST. Okay, so this nucleus thing says, sometimes you have in your very short discourse, peel oranges and slice crosswise, two units where you don't want to have more weight attached to any of them. You have to do these two things. You have to peel them and then slice. No choice. These are called multi-nuclear relations, and the notation is going, can't point there, from the 1 to 2 unit downwards by these straight lines to the two members of the relation. And this can spread over longer discourse as well, peel the oranges and so on. Oh, that's great. Thank you. We peel, we slice, we arrange, we sprinkle, and we chill. And all these steps are equally important. So this is a multi-nuclear relation. It's not binary this time. It has 5 different units, but the same temporal sequence relation. Okay, so this can happen, but the majority of relations is actually of this other kind. It is a mononuclear relation, or subordinate, as they also call it, with a, I think, intended reference to linguistic subordination. Here we have a substantial concession relation. Tempting as it may be, we shouldn't embrace every popular issue. This is one from Mann Thompson's examples, which we can paraphrase as, although it is tempting, we shouldn't. You concede it is tempting, but then no, we should not. And that's a classical case of a concession. Concession can also appear in larger units. I personally favor the initiative. However, I don't think endorsing a specific freeze proposal is now a good idea. Instead, we should limit our involvement and do something else. Here we have a local antithesis relation. I don't think we should do this. Instead, we should do this. Antithesis is kind of a contrastive relation, but with nuclearity. So this is less important. This is the most important thing, because that's what I want us to do. That's why this is the satellite and this is the nucleus. Did I mention the notation? No, I didn't. Vertical line indicates the nucleus of the relation, and the arrow is always pointing from satellite to the nucleus. Yeah, and then the however or the but here actually signals then the concession. Even though this is the case, still I don't think we should endorse. I think we should do this. So that's the basic process of building discourse structure recursively from the bottom to the top. And we can look at one example relation and its definition. There are like 25 different relations in Mann and Thompson's set, and they are characterized by a description of the nucleus, which is, in this case, a subjective statement, which the reader, as the reader, might not accept or might not regard as sufficiently important or positive. If I say tomorrow there will be sunny weather again, you will say, how do you know? And I better give you some evidence, right? You can say, I heard the radio news this morning and they were very sure that it's sunny tomorrow. That would be my satellite. The statement that the reader is likely to accept, you trust the radio, usually an objective description of a fact. So here's my subjective claim and the evidence is to back it up. The combination of nucleus and satellite has a goal. Namely, in this case, understanding the satellite makes it easier for the reader to accept the nucleus or to share this particular viewpoint. So if I want you to believe the nice weather tomorrow, I come up with this evidence. And the fourth important field of any relation definition is the effect, supposedly on the reader. His or her belief in the nucleus is increased. Yes, there will be great weather tomorrow. That's the idea of the evidence relation. And it's kind of a paradigmatic example for how these definitions are being composed. They're not very formal definitions. They play with intentions. That's the idea of eRST, to model in the end the intentional structure of the text. And that's why we get things like make it easier to accept, share a viewpoint, which is of course subjective. And we'll come back to that later on. Here's the whole set of relations. I will not go through them, just some of them are relatively easy to recognize. For instance, the conditions, the if then. There are causal results, of course. There is restatement and summary. We call them textual relations because they don't add new information. They're just there to give a better textual structure. We have this basic division into more semantic and more pragmatic relations. So these are basically providing information to the readers, and these are trying to influence beliefs of the readers. That is the distinction between these guys and those relations over there. So evidence comes up here. It was about increasing your belief in the nucleus, right? Whereas all these relations wouldn't use their vocabulary in definitions. They would say present information, inform the reader about some causal relationship, and so forth. And we have these multinuclear relations in brown because they are not a fourth group really. These are orthogonal to these three groups. The contrast is a subject matter thing. It says, well, my brother is 18 years old, my sister is 15 years old. Nothing is more important, it's just a kind of contrast in age. Sequence we have seen already. This says I'm enumerating things that I'm using for a common purpose. Conjunction and joint are some more and less useful multinuclear relations. Okay, so this is the overall set. And the last thing I want to mention about eRST, which is kind of important for discourse structure, is the so-called strong nuclearity principle. When we say there is a relation holding between two things, and it's deliberately in German because I want you to attend to the structure, not to the content really. When we assign a relation like evaluation nucleus, which means the nucleus, this whole segment is evaluating the satellite, this whole segment. When it holds between two larger segments, as in that case for evaluation, it in particular holds between the most central nuclei. This is kind of important. What is the central nucleus? We start at the top of the tree, go down, and we follow the straight lines. We say, okay, here's a straight line, there's a straight line. From here, I go down straight, straight, straight. So this is an important unit. It's the nucleus of the antithesis, then the nucleus of the circumstance, then of the preparation, and then takes part in this joint relation. Likewise, this thing is reachable only by following straight lines, right? I'm interested in the evaluation, so I follow the curved line and then go down straight, and I end up here. So the claim of this theory is I made some local decisions, antithesis, transition, cause, and so on and so forth. But in the end, I have some information about what is important for the text as a whole. So my evaluation says this one and this one together, right? Evaluate in particular this thing, which means the bank did something yesterday. They lowered the interest rates. I'm not sure this is a good move. Basically, we need more steps to get the economy back up again. And politicians need to become active now. That's the main message of the text, in fact. That's a very nice aspect of this theory, which has been exploited for text summarization, for instance, from the beginning, because obviously this is a fairly good summary, right? The EZB yesterday did something to the interest rates. I'm not sure that's a good move. That's not enough. The politicians now have to take additional measures. Okay, so that's the strong nuclearity principle. In the end, the overall goal of eRST, as Thompson and Mann phrased it, if the text has a plausible analysis of tree structure, then it's a coherent text. So it's meant as an account of text coherence in both ways, right? If coherent, there should be an analysis, and vice versa. Right, over the years, some corpora have been made available for English. The most, still, I guess, most well known is the eRST Discourse Tree Bank from the Wall Street Journal from 2003. The GAM corpus is, I think by now, in terms of eRST, it's larger than the eRST Discourse Tree Bank, developed in Zeldes group in Washington. In Vancouver, people have built another eRST corpus. Our own corpus will be mentioned now in the next episode of this talk. And we also have a parallel corpus of very short texts where we annotated 2 discourse theories plus argumentation structure, so you can look at contrast between the different accounts. Which brings me to the next step, which is the Potsdam Commentary Corpus, something that we started building in 2003, actually, and from the beginning, it was meant as a multi-layer corpus. So we started out with not just eRST, but adding additional layers that I will mention later. For that reason, it's not very big. We did manual annotation at the time, multiple layers, so we couldn't do 1,000 texts. We started with 176 from a regional daily, and we keep adding from this Berlin-based newspaper more texts. At the time, we chose a regional newspaper because we wanted to do automatic syntactic parsing and later discourse parsing, so we wanted some not too intricate linguistic structure like you get in a major newspaper. So this was actually a good choice from that perspective, I think, because it's easier to parse. To get interesting rhetorical structure, we didn't look at news text, we wanted only editorials, commentary text, because their opinions are being influenced, and that's more interesting for rhetorics than just presenting news. And indeed, we did a lot of work on argumentation mining in the last 10 years on this corpus and on other data. This is an example. Here is an English translation, just to give you an idea of what's happening in these texts. This is the central nucleus, the main statement in the text. It's about pox vaccination, and the main claim here in this text is only those who have their children vaccinated will contribute to vaccines becoming superfluous someday. So here's going on about the pros and cons of pox vaccination, and that's kind of the conclusion. And then there is people have other arguments, but they are not so important, these other arguments. So that's the kind of the rhetoric in this example. Okay, layers of annotation. We have sentence syntax. The Tiger scheme has been used for different German corpora for a long time. We have coreference. We have information structure, which is focusing on topic, information structure on topic. We have shallow discourse structure in the sense of the Penn discourse tree bank, which is an alternative view on discourse structure, a less ambitious one in the sense that PDTB doesn't do a full tree structure, but only local relations, which is actually a good idea to start with that, I think. And then we have the eRST layer. And yeah, as you notice, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different annotation tools deliberately. For sentence syntax, we used a tool that made it very easy to draw these trees on screen. I think it doesn't exist anymore actually, because it ran on old workstations that are, I guess, offline by now. For coreference, we use the default annotation tool for coreference. And Max Esmeralda is very good when you have multiple layers of just labeling spans. Conano is a tool we built ourselves. It finds connectives, conjunctions, and adverbials in the text, in German text, and then suggests already the PDTB annotation that you can then edit. And the eRST tool you will see in a few minutes. Yeah, so there is a multi-layer corpus. We want to do something with it. For instance, we want to see the annotations and want to query them. So here are the different tools. This is, I think, syntax tree building. This is the eRST tool. This is coreference. This is Esmeralda doing information structural topic. Very different views, which make it easy to annotate the respective conceptual scheme. Very different frameworks, all based on XML. That's the good news. So around 2008, I believe, we proposed this interchange format called POLA, the Potsdamer Austausch format for linguistic annotation, something like this, which is an XML that tries to capture, actually it achieves it, to capture the commonalities of the XMLs that we get from the tools, put it all together. And on this level, we could do some statistical evaluation. At the time, we used Weka a lot, or we can throw everything into this linguistic database. And if we do it, then it looks like this. Here we have a view of the syntax tree. We just did a query for a noun phrase, in particular connective. This is one hit, one sentence. Here is the connective. Here's a noun phrase. We could now look also at the information structure, at the discourse reference and co-reference. Here's the co-reference and the eRST tree. All can be visualized independently. And the important thing is we can have queries that connect the different layers. Otherwise, the multi-layer aspect would be kind of useless. So, for example, here is a query. We are interested in two sentences with co-referential subjects, and the second one should be pronoun, if this is, for example, your research question. The blue things all introduce one entity. They say, give me anything that is of category sentence, all the sentences. Give me anything, give me some note. So I have two sets of candidates already. Third one, give me another sentence. Give me something that is part of speech, pronoun, personal. And that's the four things that are on the table. They're all sets, so we need to reduce the space now. #1 refers to the first thing that we built, #2 to the second, third, fourth. So the first and the second, which is the sentence and the anything, should be in a subject relation. And that narrows the search space a lot, right? Here we have all sentences, here we have all notes we can think of, and now we want only those that are in subject relation. The same between 3 and 4, this sentence and the pronoun. And then we want these things to be co-referential. Which one? Pronoun, number 4, and this guy, number 2. That's the last constraint. And by the way, our languages in our corpus should be English and not anything else. Yeah, so this fuses syntax annotation and coreference, to give you just one example of how to put things together. There is a query language that allows you to look for precedence, for dominance in trees, direct, indirect. Pointing relations are, for instance, the coreference relations. In trees, you can look at common parent nodes, common ancestors, rightmost child, leftmost child, children, and so on and so forth. People who don't like to learn the query language can use a graphical query builder, which allows you to put together the tree structure of your query step by step. Yeah, so the PCC is available in ANIS. By the way, many corpora are available in this ANIS database. I think it's visible here. There's just one part of it that colleagues at Humboldt University in Berlin, where the main server is located now, have put together and allow for open querying, in fact. Also, the PCC in ANIS is openly available to play with it. Right, then I will get to human annotation. I'll talk about guidelines, some problems, and about disagreements. So over the years, it turned out for us, after having many students annotate many texts, that this kind of procedure seemed to us the most productive one. So we published these guidelines in 2017 together with Meister Weiler in Vancouver and from Das postdoc in Potsdam. First step is obvious: read the complete text. You have an idea what the text wants from the readers. Then divide it into EDUs. Obviously, the first thing we need to do, otherwise we cannot assign relations. But before we start thinking about relations, it seems wise for many texts to look informally about topic boundaries. Does my text break down into different areas of topicality that in the end in the tree should be distinct? Then you informally mark them. Next step, go through your text. Is there something that is more or less important? Then get clear about what are the most important statements in the text. You remember the strong nuclearity principle. In the end, the tree should reflect this, right? The relative prominence of the different units. And then the actual assignment of relation starts. First of all, we go one pass through the text left to right, look at all the adjacent elementary discourse units. Is there a clear connection between them? Like, although A, comma B is very clear a concession relation and nothing else. Then you'd add it to the analysis. And the second pass then is the more complex one. Bottom up, put all the bits and pieces together until you have a complete tree. All the relations you assign should be applicable according to the manual, and so on. A word about EDUs. The main question about these discourse units is, if it's not a sentence, if it's smaller than a sentence, then you need pretty clear rules which clauses count as EDUs and which do not. I just brought one example. We did this in a fairly elaborate way for German, distinguishing all the different types of subordinate clauses. The main thing here is to differentiate between the first example, which is just one EDU. It's completely clear that the mayor needs to resign. And the second one, the chairperson should stay in office while the mayor needs to resign. Because here we have two different eventualities, really. The chairperson should stay, the mayor needs to resign, are two distinct events in a prospective world. And there's only one event, it's clear that. So that here doesn't introduce a new EDU, but it really specifies the content of what is being clear, and that's why we want only one EDU in that case. So these decisions you have to make for different types of units. In the end, the overarching principle is that every EDU should be an independent unit of information. It should be able to stand on its own feet. The mayor needs to resign, the chairperson should stay in office. Then we turn to relations. I brought another example, no need to read everything, but just to give you an idea of what's happening in these definitions. For background, understanding the satellite makes it easier for the reader to understand the content of the nucleus. Without, it would be difficult to comprehend, and so on and so forth. Just an idea of what these definitions look like. Last part of the guidelines after these relation definitions is some hints what to do in cases of doubt. The first one is, in the presence of structural ambiguity, we give some hint what to prefer. So this is a constellation that we actually find quite often in our text. Tomorrow there will be great weather. The radio said so, and my gut feeling is the same. So I have two pieces of evidence supporting my main claim. And then structurally I can link them independently to the claim, or I can first use the two evidences, put them together in a list relation, and then say this list is evidence for my claim. Not much of a difference. So annotators should get some guidance so that we don't get spurious ambiguity in the end between competing analysis. That's the idea of this first aspect of hints. Second one is, if you see a pragmatic relation and a semantic relation, both seem to be applicable, elaboration and reason, for instance, then please prefer the reason, because our texts are opinionated texts. In that sense, it's a genre-specific heuristic. We want, in the end, the rhetoric, the argumentation come across. So pragmatic relations are more valuable for our purposes. prefer the more informative relations. If there is causality, then yeah, use the causality, not just elaboration. Elaboration means here's more detail about what I said already. And this is not incompatible with causality, right? Sometimes you have both detail, and detail also explains the thing that you just said. So in that case, we want to prefer the causality because it's more informative. And sometimes it gets tricky because there are quite fine-grained differences between similar relations. I will have an example later about this contrast triple. But first of all, I want to show you how all this works then in the eRST tool. The first step is to load the text into the tool and to assign segment boundaries, EDUs, finishing here. With every green bar, there's an end of an EDU. Then you click on structure and it builds a fairly empty structure, but we have now distinct EDUs that we can think about linking. We also notice, oops, we missed one green bar, so we should go back to text and correct that. And then we start about relations and think what can be locally combined. Visitors have begun to overwhelm the city of Barcelona and residents are getting really angry. That sounds like a subjective observation, right? People are getting angry, visitors are swapping the city. But here are some numbers, looks like official statistics. So this is the evidence for that. A local decision our annotator makes relatively quickly. And here is another local decision that serves as background for that stuff. So this is pass one. Do we see any clear local connections? And then step two, the big step means to go left to right or go in any direction, actually. We don't prescribe any linear order for building the tree so that in the end you have linked all these things together into one big tree, not too big in this case. It's a fairly small short text. Yeah, okay, so that's eRST tool, which is, I think, from the early 2000s. It's still running in Tickle TK, if you enjoy that. It still runs on this Mac for some reasons, but it's getting more difficult to run it. So there is an alternative now. There is eRST Web, a browser-based tool, also coming from Anja Zeldes' group in Washington, which does basically the same job in a slightly different user interface. Right, we talk about human annotation, which means we also should worry about agreement. How do we know whether two people agree or whether later on a system agrees with a human being? The approach that is commonly used, here we have a table example from Shafik Jyoti's paper, Codra. These are all the constituents, the text spans that are used by one of the two annotators. Whether one is a system or not, doesn't matter. Yeah? So we have two annotators labeling the text, and these are all the spans that are being used. Spans means here's a span, and there is a span, and oops, here's a very long span, and so on and so forth. That means that annotators don't have the same spans. You know? They vary because they set boundaries in different ways. So annotator 1 has these ones, from 1 to 1, both system and human found it, 2 to 2, only system has found. Instead, the human found 2 to 7 as a long unit, which is adjacent to 1, 1, and so on. And then if the human is right and the system is the system, we can compute precision and recall in the usual way. And then we can add nuclearity. The human said, here is a satellite, and the other unit is the nucleus, and these are my nuclearity decisions. The system makes these nuclearity decisions. In the same way, we can compute precision and recall. In the very last step, we add the relations that are labels for these nuclearity assignments. And again, we can compute precision recall in the same way. In this example, they look boringly similar. Recall precision, recall precision, recall precision. That's because both human and system found 10 units. And so the number of stars is the same in both analysis, and therefore precision and recall in the end are the same. But that's an artifact of this particular example. Yeah, so commonly eRST agreement is evaluated not by just one number, but by giving these 3 different numbers. First of all, did people agree on spans? Did they agree on assigning nuclearity? And then about labeling the relations. So we usually get 3 different numbers. And last year we made one experiment on a part of the PCC with two well-trained annotators. Segmentation was already given. We wanted to factor out the segmentation problem and just look at agreement for building the tree. And those are the figures that we got. Relations is a problem still. Nuclearity is okayish, I would say. Span is, yeah, not great, not perfect, but reasonable, I think. Nuclearity and relations are still tricky. And I think there are good reasons why it's tricky. And I will talk about that soon. In fact, now, and this is actually ongoing work where we are looking in detail at why people disagree in building these trees. Okay, so over the years we observe that annotators don't agree very much with each other. Is that bad? For many tasks, this would be bad. Named entity recognition, people don't agree whether this is a named entity or not. Not good news, right? Annotation guidelines should specify that. I think for eRST, this is not a problem per se. A bold statement, isn't it? Then we find annotators don't agree very much with themselves. How do I know? I ask annotators afterwards. How did you like the process? What was it? Here it could be this way or that way. I don't care really. And here, completely ambiguous to me, but still I built this tree and here's your tree. And that is a problem, I think, because in the end, our annotators should feel happy after building that tree. And so my slogan would be, the eRST tree is supposed to capture a subjective interpretation by an analyst. That's why I think this is not per se a problem if you get different trees from different people. But it should do so as transparently and unambiguously as possible. If I annotated text, I don't want to get frustrated because I don't know if this is cause or reason. It can be contrast or sequence, both. What am I supposed to do if both is possible? Yeah, so these are the things we want to get under control. To illustrate these problems, here's my little example text. I give you 3 seconds to understand. And I will show you different analysis of this little text. I will exaggerate a little bit in the sense I go to different annotation guidelines from the English eRST and from our own guidelines to come up with many alternatives, but still the basic problem is the same. We saw this polar bear cut. That's the main statement, right? And then we get 2 elaborations. It kept climbing and it was the cutest thing. It has a teddy-like head. So 2 elaboration object attribute relations, satellite, satellite, and they're both connected. That's fine, right? Here's my main statement. There is this polar bear cut and we get 2 details. Great, finished. No, annotator 2 says this is completely different. Here I have a conjunction. I have 2 things that are of the same status. They just connect. It did this and it also has this property. And this is just the background to understand this. This is my main content. I learned something cute about this polar bear cut. And what do I tell this annotator? No, you're all wrong? Oh, no. Unfortunately, there's a 3rd annotator, and he says, or she says, no, yeah, okay, but this is not background. This is not just making understanding easier. It's also happening at the same time. We saw it, and this is what it does at this time. So it's a circumstance relation, not a background relation. Oh, unfortunately, we have more annotators hanging around. This one prefers a list instead of a conjunction, and I will not go into details. In the eRST guidelines, you have a topic comment relation in the linguistic sense. So here I introduce a topic. This text will be about this polar bear cut, and this is a comment about the topic. Perfectly correct. Oh my goodness. Or we can have again this combination with conjunction instead of list. Or we can say, by the way, what I find important is there is subjective judgment here. It was the cutest thing I had seen in years. That's an evaluation, isn't it? Yes, I like this polar bear cut. So my analysis is we saw it and it did something, that's the elaboration, but then I want an evaluation here. Even though it's also an elaboration, yes, but my evaluation is one. So it's getting crazy. And we can have another evaluation relation which says the nucleus is the evaluation of the satellite. Last one, We can have a multi-nuclear evaluation in the English guidelines even. So it's a bit messy. And this is the kind of thing that we are trying to sort out now, right? To get some handle on. So first we wanted some more data, and one of my students built a corpus of news text from the Austrian News Agency, and we have double annotated texts. We have double annotated text from the PCC, as we know. Altogether, we have quite a few RST trees now to play with and look at disagreement issues. For English, we work with the eRST Discourse tree bank, which comes also with 50 texts that have 2 annotations, and that didn't receive too much attention over the 20 years for some reason. 26 have identical segmentation. We are looking only at these. We're again factoring out the segmentation problem. We want disagreements on other levels first and worry about segment decisions later. Last additional corpus is from the United Nations Security Council, which another PhD student wrote last year. Okay, first we want to know where are the disagreements. Looking at these trees, here it's relatively easy, but for a complete text, you look at a tree, that is not very helpful. So what comes to rescue is the tool eRST Taste that yet another PhD student built in 2019, which just gives you a list of all the choice points that annotators had and all the attributes of those choice points. The text, the segments, the nuclearity, the relation, and so on and so forth. So for a corpus, then we get a long, long list of points of agreement or disagreement that we can inspect further. Now the question is, what does it mean to inspect further? We defined these 5 formal classes of what can happen. There can be a perfect match. That's the easy case. Example, 1 tree, 2nd tree, then the blue stuff is a perfect match. Units 3 and 4, we get both annotators seeing an attribution relation. Good, nothing to worry about. Second case is we have a relation mismatch. We have the same spans, but a different relation. Unfortunately, as we saw polar bear cub examples that would belong to this category, it's happening, here units 1 and 2 are combined into an entity elaboration, or somebody else saw a clause here between the same units. That's the relation mismatch. The scope mismatch actually has many subclasses. It's a bit more tricky. For instance, you can have the same overall span, the same relation, but a different split point. It meets in a different place. And I think my example is illustrating exactly this. Yeah, we have the same relation, elaboration. We have the same span, 1 to 5 is covered by this relation, but the split point is different. Here, the elaboration is between 3 and 5 and 1 and 2. Here, the elaboration is between 5 and 1 to 4. That's one particular case of scope mismatch, and there are some others where you have different overall spans, but an identical relation and an identical split point, which means you have an elaboration, but not between this and this. That's what one annotator says, the other says it's between this and this, different units, but the same split point. And so on, some other subcases. Left priority mismatch means the same EDU is attached first to the left or to the right. That's a specifically interesting case because discourse structure gets a different twist, right? Where I connect my EDU first in this way or that way. And the last thing is a complete no match that eRST Taste computes. I cannot see any parallelism here. So it's a bit of hopelessness. And we worked with the combination of the German PCC and the APA texts, 46 texts altogether, and these number of EDUs, the English UNSC corpus, and the English RSTDT. We have some agreement values there, which I don't want to get into, and these are the 5 categories. Perfect match, 26%, and they are surprisingly similar, actually, between across these 2 corpora at least. In the English RSTDT, there are quite a few more perfect matches for some reason. Accordingly, there's less no match cases. And for the others, again, it's quite parallel. Relation mismatch 20, 20, 20, very parallel. Scope mismatch 22, 21, 15. And these left-right thingies turned out relatively rare in all corpora. Okay, that's a lot of stuff to look at. We decide to focus for now on relation mismatch and scope mismatch. And Tace would give us this table. We would just look at the cases of relation mismatch and scope mismatch and play the game of an omniscient, looking from the top, third annotator that now rates this disagreement. What's going on? Why do people have different opinions? And then 4 things can happen, is our idea. First, I am the omniscient observer now, and I disagree with one annotation. I think it's plain wrong. It can happen in annotation. Okay, the other case is, if I were the annotator, I would use both labels that A and B assign. They're both good. That's this case. Vague means, I can see you see it this way. I can see you see it that way. I have a slight preference for this way, but both are plausible. So that's the vague case. And either or is a variant on both, but the two are actually mutually exclusive. Either this holds or that holds. And as I said, we went through this number of instances in English and German for the confusion matrix, which is maybe not so important now actually for the relations. And the last step then was to look at reasons for disagreement. We tried to find classes of underlying reasons. What's going on? Why do people disagree? First, there are these formal structural alternatives. Even though the guidelines try to remove these choices, they are still there. There's, for instance, one claim followed by 2 separate evidences and some variants of that problem. So that's not so much about interpretation. It's just eRST says you can do it this way or that way structurally, and annotators should be nudged into one way to get harmony, let's say. Possibly the most important reason is relation definition overlap. We saw background before, and something like background applies in very many cases. Make the rest of the text easier to understand for the reader. That's so vague that it happens all the time, right? Elaboration likewise means adding more detail. So they're very broadly applicable, and that's a common problem, if it's a problem. The second class of overlap is that, in particular, these contrastive, to some extent also the causal relations, are so fine-grained in their definitions. Here is actually antithesis versus concession. Brown means they are identical. These are the Mann-Thompson definitions. Brown means it's the same for antithesis and concession. Black means basically the same, and only red is the difference between the two. So what's the difference? In antithesis, you cannot have positive regard for both situations. You like one more than the other. In concession, the writer is not claiming that S, the satellite, does not hold, because you concede it. Yeah, so I'm conceding that it's a bit cold out there, but still it's a nice day. Yeah, okay, but this red and that red, they are not mutually exclusive. Right? Maybe here is a different focus, here's a different focus, but they can both apply to the same situation in the world. So that's what I mean by contrast, antithesis, concession being inherently difficult to distinguish, and relation definitions need to be sharpened. Third box of reasons is the epistemic status of the propositions. Is my statement subjective or objective? That's very often not clear if there is a sentence saying. Can't just an example right now, but you might imagine, objectivity is not something that you can pin down very neatly in all cases, but it has consequences. If it's subjective, you should assign reason. If it's objective, causality in the world, it should be cause. So these decisions have to be made in choosing the relation. Then there are quite a few examples of non-identity of reference that lead to different causality relations, for instance. I remember one case in old text, nobody knows anymore whether that part of the city that is named is the same as the area that is close to the station, because it's a city somewhere in Brandenburg, nobody knows it anyway. So its name and description, the station area, is it the same or not? And it leads to decisions like this, is there causality? So this is the presupposed knowledge or bias bin number 4 of underlying reasons. This we have seen already. Three more. Assignment of importance to spans. I mentioned this in the beginning, right? You go through the text and you look informally what is more important in the message. This is likely to generate some disagreement. Some people favor subjective judgment as being important. Some people favor the news item as more important. So these things decide on nuclearity, which in turn influences relation choice. Elaboration says the general is the nucleus, the detail is the satellite. So the direct connection between importance and relation choice. And then these decisions also influence the span range. The strong nuclearity principle, you can apply it in your analysis, or you can not rank it as important and make your decisions on other grounds, such as global text structure. Sometimes there are topic switches in text, right? I describe something here and then some other event that is vaguely related. Do I want a break in the tree? Yes, maybe I want, because different topics. On the other hand, there is a local antithesis relation between the two units at the meeting point between these two topic breaks. So I can specify, I can prefer either the topic switch and then a big break there, or I can mark the local coherence relation and then get a different structure. Example of global text structure is the plain old opening, core, and rhetorical ending that you get in commentary text. In the end, there's often a bang at the end that kind of summarizes the opinion. And a linguistic phenomenon that co-occurs with some of these things is ambiguity, obviously, of such deictic expressions like this. This led to something else. So what's the that? How far to the left does the scope of the this actually stretch? And similarly for nonetheless, none the what, this one or more left context. So linguistics also has some complications to offer for making the decisions. Good, yeah, then in the end, some remarks on automatic eRST parsing, which Sarah Shamouamadi did 2 years ago. Again, the data slide, because we're not working only with the PCC now, but also with these additional corpora which we made available last year. So for German, there is now a somewhat bigger corpus that people can work with. And we used a parser that looks a bit ancient. It is a bit ancient, but why did Sarah actually select it? It is well documented. That's important when you want to train it on a new language. It's relatively lightweight, and it turned out to be relatively easily adaptable. She looked at more recent neural parsers, the Koto parser, the Kobayashi parser, and they all were either not easy to install or not installable at all. There was no way to say, please train it on my German corpus, don't use the English model that you have already. So there were some compromises to make, and in the end, we took this feature-based shift-reduced parser from 2014. Disadvantage, there still was some coding work to do, but now we have this parser for German in a publicly available Docker image, and would claim that it's relatively easy to retrain for a language like Polish if you have eRST data. The point of the paper last year was to run some experiments with this composite corpus. We have the PCC, a new version of the PCC, which has been re-annotated partly. That's the PCC star. We have this blogs corpus, a really different genre, and we have this news text from the Austrian press agency. And for all these numbers, I just want to point you to the most simple or straightforward corpus is the blogs corpus. And these are the values we get for span, nuclearity, and relations. To remember, here are the human agreement figures that we saw earlier. So it doesn't vary a whole. Actually, yes, it does vary quite a bit between 77 and 81. Again, relations is sadly difficult in terms of agreement and parser performance in this case. It's lower than what people get for the English discourse tree bank. Their relations achieve better results and reasons looked into. Then we ran all these different ways of training on the APA, testing on the PCC, and so on and so forth. And the best combination overall is you train on blogs and the new PCC, and you test on the blogs, and you get the best numbers overall. Because you have a relatively big corpus now, a big training corpus, it's apparently different from the APA text, because adding the APA didn't actually boost performance when testing on blogs. So there must be something going on in the model that you get by adding APA to the blogs and PCC texts. Yeah. And again, we have confusion matrices, which I don't want to bother you with, but if you have questions about it, we can look at these things. Let me sum up. I tried to introduce rhetorical structure theory as a model of text coherence, showed you the multi-layer corpus PCC and how it grew over 20 and few years. The ANNIS database is a freely available tool for visualizing and querying corpora. You can view corpora at a valid server. You can download your own ANNIS and install it yourself and put your own corpora inside. We talked about ambiguity and vagueness in eRST annotation, and very quickly some baseline parsing results. Ongoing work is we're picking on with disagreements. We really like them and want to explore them in more depth. And these things have consequences, right? In annotation, I want to give my annotators clear instruction. You see two relations there, okay, then do it. You are really not sure which relation applies here, okay, please say so, specify it in your analysis. That's the kind of covering the uncertainty that we want to achieve in these subjective tasks, because eRST is subjective. Likewise, when doing parsing, if we put vagueness and ambiguity into the annotation, then our parsers need to cope with that. So there are some technical, interesting things coming up, and evaluating means not anymore, here's my gold standard and here's my precision and recall or kappa value or whatever. It gets more complicated, of course. This is the whole discussion of perspectivism in the field of NLP, which so far hasn't been really applied to discourse structure as far as we know. So our analysis that we recently submitted is kind of a first step doing this for eRST at least. And the last piece of ongoing work I just want to mention in case you're interested is this stuff. I did text analysis for 25 years and it's really boring now. I don't want text anymore. So we have pictures. We teach a seminar now with clever students who like comics. And there's interesting questions for discourse structure. Is there coherence here? Yeah? Or is coherence a concept that doesn't have anything to say? Is there coherence? And if so, then where? Between panel and panel? Between panel and the text box? Or where is the coherence? Is it between text box and text box, or everywhere or nowhere? For instance, one comic analyst claims it's actually, the whole thing is a language. There is a visual language, like there is natural spoken language, there is sign language and other languages. And language means there is grammar. So he claims there's a grammar for these things. And that means in turn, he doesn't need coherence anymore because it's all in the grammar. There's ambiguity, but it's grammatical ambiguity. And an alternative discourse-oriented view would say, well, yeah, there's also this subjective, more high-level coherence maybe going on when moving from one to the next. But we're not sure yet. This is under exploration. Thank you very much.